The Mishnah here had told us a very, I guess, a very important rule about needing, if you need to build a sukkah for the purpose of sukkahs, you have to have in mind lishma. You have to have in mind that the sukkah is in order to fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah. And we have a machlekes, an argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai holds that you have to build a sukkah lishma, has to be for the purpose of sukkahs. And if it was built and it's just there, you have a sukkah, it's pre-existing, or you didn't have in mind for the holiday of sukkah, for the mitzvah of sukkah. So according to Beis Shammai, it's invalid. According to Beis Hillel, it's kosher because you don't need to have in mind for sukkahs, for the mitzvah of sukkah. And then the Mishnah tells us what is considered a sukkah yeshana, this pre-existing sukkah, this old sukkah that wasn't made for sukkahs. That is a sukkah that's made more than 30 days early. But if the sukkah is made within 30 days, then even Beis Shammai would agree that it's kosher, because we assume that the person built it for sukkahs. Why within 30 days do we assume that a person built it for sukkahs? The Shem Chag, that's the term used. He built it for sukkahs. Why do we assume that if it's within 30 days? So Rashi tells us this halacha that shoyalin behilchos hachag, during the 30 days before sukkahs, you discussed the laws of sukkahs, and it's being asked. Questions are asked about sukkahs. So the person who built a sukkah then is probably building it for sukkahs. However, if it was built before 30 days, then you have a problem. If it was built before 30 days, it might not have been built for sukkahs, and therefore, according to Beis Shammai, it would be hustle. Then the Mishnah says, what happens if you built it before 30 days, but you had in mind clearly for sukkahs? So that, the Mishnah says, is going to be kosher. Now let's think about that statement. You built a sukkah the beginning of the year, meaning the year before. You built it way before. And even if you built it then, but you had in mind for the mitzvah, it's going to be kosher. Now, why would I think it's not going to be kosher? You had in mind for sukkahs. Why shouldn't it be kosher? So Beis Shammai, because he says that you built a sukkah more than 30, because he says a sukkah that's more than 30 days is puzzle. So for some reason, you might think that here it's more than 30 days old, it's pre-existing. You might think it's not good. No, it's good because he has in mind. If he had in mind, then of course it's good. In other words, it's clarifying Beis Shammai's view that it's all about having in mind for sukkahs. So it would seem that this statement is really telling us something according to Beis Shammai. However, there is a way of learning that this statement really is adding something in the opinion of Beis Hillel. How would it be adding something in the opinion of Beis Hillel? Well, what does Beis Hillel say? Why would Beis Hillel hold that it wouldn't be valid? Or what would be wrong with a sukkah that's a year old and you had in mind for sukkahs? What's the problem with such a sukkah? So it's possible to say that we mentioned yesterday about a concept of, and we mentioned the day before as well, about this concept of needing to add something new to that sukkah. So for example, either you add a new bamboo branch, that bamboo stick that covers the entire length of the sukkah, or it covers the entire width of the sukkah, or you add a a piece of schach that's at least one handbreadth by a handbreadth, and you need to add something new for a sukkah, even according to Beis Hillel, which means that even though Beis Hillel says that you don't need to have in mind for sukkahs, but you do need to add something new in order for it to be a kosher sukkah. You need to be mechadish something. Now that concept, that law that you need to add something to make it new for sukkahs, that doesn't apply if you had in mind when you built the sukkah that it's for sukkahs. So even according to Beis Hillel, this sentence is adding something because it's saying if you built a sukkah in the beginning of the year, 6 months ago, let's say, you built it 6 months early, and you put up the sukkah having in mind for sukkahs. When sukkahs comes around, what does Beis Hillel hold? Do you need to add something new to that sukkah, or is that sukkah good as is? So according to this understanding, the sukkah is good as is, even according to Beis Hillel, that you normally need to add something new, which is something we saw in Tosfos. It's based on a Yerushalmi. You need to add something, innovate something to your sukkah. But if you built the sukkah for sukkahs, then you don't even need that. So it's possible that this last line of the Mishnah is not only going to speak about Beis Shammai's law, it's really telling us a law in Beis Hillel. So again, that has to do with this insight that we've come across, that even according to Beis Hillel, you don't have an easy pass. You don't have it's not automatic that you have a sukkah. It wasn't built for sukkahs. It's kosher. It's not automatic. And we saw that really in the previous Gemaras as well, that even according to Beis Hillel, there were certain rules that we had to cover. We had to make sure that you're not you don't just rely on Hillel's law, but there are certain criteria, certain qualifications to his law. It's permissible. Sukkah, you don't have to make for sukkahs. But previously in Chesam and Beis on the page 8b, we saw some laws. For example, that it has to be recognizable that it was built for sale, for shade. And that would mean that it has a substantial amount of schach on top of it, not just the majority, but it has to be more than that. It has to be clear that it was made for sale, for shade. And we also learned about the law of the sukkahs hayotzrim, the sukkah of the potters, that the sukkah, if it's used year round, that could also be a problem of it being a kosher sukkah. It's your house. It's really your house that you're using year round. So it wouldn't be a kosher sukkah. So even though you don't have to build it for sukkahs, but if it's your house that you're using year round, it's loy minkara milsa. It's not recognizable that you're dwelling in it for sukkahs. So in other words, the sukkah maybe could be kosher, but the problem is you're dwelling in it won't be a good dwelling, because it has to be recognizable that you're dwelling in it should be for sukkahs. And if you use it year round, it invalidates your dwelling in it. In other words, your dwelling in it won't be recognizable that it's for sukkah. So we have the concept of the sukkah needing to be built for shade, even if it's not built for sukkah. It's to be built for shade. It has to be recognizable that your dwelling in it is for sukkah. Therefore, if it's used year round, it's not going to be a good sukkah. And now on page 9a, we learned in Tosfos that you need to add something new in order, even though you built it, and it doesn't need to be built for sukkahs. You built it for shade, but the thing is that you have to add a tefach, or at least something along the entire length or along the entire width for sukkahs. And now we have a a law that could exempt you from that. And what would be the exemption from that? Even if it's an old sukkah, you won't have to do that. You won't have to build the extra tefach of the extra handbreadth by handbreadth of new new schach. What would be the exemption from that? And that would be what the Mishnah says, that if you built it having in mind for sukkahs, then you're exempt. You're exempt from that law. At least that's one way of learning this Mishnah, that it's talking about Beis Hillel, not only Beis Shammai. Now, the reason why you would want to learn that way is because the Gemara doesn't like to discuss. It seems surprising that the Gemara is going into the opinion of Beis Shammai, or the Mishnah, I should say, that the Mishnah would delve into the opinion of Beis Shammai in depth. Why is that surprising? Because we have some Gemaras that ask questions on where it brings up Beis Shammai's view, and it says, Taima de Beis Shammai also liyashmi'ina. You're coming to tell me the reason of Beis Shammai, like you're coming to dwell on Beis Shammai. We don't hold like Beis Shammai. So even though the Mishnah will say the opinion of Beis Shammai, but it does seem that it seems that the Gemara doesn't like to, the Gemara doesn't like when the Mishnah will like overly get into, dwell on Beis Shammai's view, since it's totally not accepted in halacha. And because of that, it seems to me that that's why we found that the Shulchan Aruch wants to follow this Yerushalmi. Why is the Shulchan Aruch following the Jerusalem Talmud? Why is it not saying that there's an argument between the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud? So maybe I'm sharing a little thought that maybe the reason why the Gemara doesn't want to, that the Poskim, Beis Yosef, the Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch as well, they all seem to follow, and Tosfos seems to follow this as well. He doesn't just say that Yerushalmi argues on Babylonian Talmud. He seems to say this is the halacha. The Babylonian Talmud follows this view. He mentions the Yerushalmi. He doesn't say that we argue on it. So it sounds like he's saying that we follow it. Why would we follow it? Why aren't we just going to say that it's an argument between the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud? So it seems maybe because the Mishnah comes at the end and says, Avalim also l'shem chag, if you made it for Sukkot, even in the beginning of the year, it's kosher. It's coming to emphasize Beis Hillel's view, not Beis Shammai's view. Because Beis Shammai's view, it seems surprising that we would emphasize and get into it. Oh, in this case, Beis Shammai would agree, why are we getting into Beis Shammai's view? But if you follow the Yerushalmi, then we understand the Mishnah. The Mishnah makes sense. It's telling us that even the Beis Hillel, guess what? That there's an exemption. You don't have to follow all the extra rules of the extra qualifications. So in other words, the Mishnah was hinting to this Yerushalmi. The Mishnah was hinting, of course, the Mishnah doesn't spell everything out. The Mishnah was written very concisely, and you need to learn it from a teacher. That's why the Mishnah is written in so cryptic style. But the idea of the Mishnah says, if you built it, l'shem chag, if you built the sukkah for Sukkot, even if you built it pre-existing much earlier, in other words, it was built 6 months before Sukkot, it's ksheira, it's kosher, even without adding anything to it. It'll be kosher, implying that, however, if you didn't have in mind for Sukkot, you would need to do something in order to make it kosher, and that would be the Yerushalmi. So, in other words, Tosfos is understanding the hint from the Yerushalmi, the hint that from the Mishnah that we follow this Yerushalmi. Maybe that's why the Poskim want to follow that, also follow suit they follow the Taisvis's view that because of this, that because the Mishnah adds this line, it would make sense that it's basically telling us Beis Hillel's view.
However, may I just add that in Rashi, it says, Beis Hillel machshirin delo bo'in and sukkah l'shem chag. And that's what we really just learned, that these other kinds of sukkahs that were built by other people even were not for sukkah, not for the holiday specifically. We can use them.
So you have a point, not from Rashi, but I think from the next Rashi. Look at the next Rashi, the final Rashi on the Mishnah, where Rashi argues on Tosfos. And Rashi says, Kshera lebeis Shammai itzra, that when it says it would be kosher, it's telling you the opinion of Beis Shammai. So I just clarified with you what Tosfos is saying, that this statement really fits with Beis Hillel as well. But Rashi does clearly state that he doesn't go for this. He says this statement is really only applicable for Beis Shammai. So Rashi seems to argue on this view. So you really see it from the next Rashi. The other Rashi that you mentioned, that you don't need a sukkah, Beis Hillel machshir, and you don't need a sukkah l'shem chag. I mean, that's the simple understanding of the Mishnah. Rashi didn't really add much in clear, he didn't really spell out that you don't have to add something. The Mishnah says that basically that is kosher. He just explains the words. That's basically the Mishnah. So Rashi didn't really add, but the next Rashi really clarifies that Rashi is arguing on the explanation that I just gave you in Tosfos, that the way that Tosfos wants to say that even for Beis Hillel there's a purpose in saying this line. Rashi says no, this is only misstated to follow Beis Shammai's view, which implies that Rashi maybe doesn't hold of this Yerushalmi. There is discussion. I remember many years ago hearing a discussion if Rashi had the full Yerushalmi. Did he have access to the full Yerushalmi Gemara? I mean, there are places I think that I've seen where Rashi quotes Yerushalmi, but could be that he doesn't have access to the full Yerushalmi. So maybe he didn't have it. I don't know. It's I have to look into the researchers, see what the researchers say about that. But
it was in any event, Rashi, that we learned that these other categories of sukkahs are all kosher to use. I might not have thought that was the case, right? So Ganvach and Rash, what is it? Right, Rak Vash, right? Right, all of those you can use.
Right. And well, they sort of fit very well with Beis Hillel's view.
Yeah.
Right. It's all about they were made not for the sake of a sukkah. So those, seemingly that's one of the main points of those.
And that's why it's positioned here. I figured that the position of it here, rather than somewhere else, is purposeful for introducing the next Mishnah.
So that's an interesting point that you make. Like, why is it brought here? It seems that it fits really a continuation of the two sukkahs of the Yitzrim. In other words, the fact that we're bringing, it's adding a qualification to the law of Beis Hillel as well, and that is that it has to be mesuchach kihilchasa. That it has to be very recognizable, that it's not kosher with it if it just has majority schach. There's a major point that the Gemara there is adding, that it has to be clearly for sale. It's not enough that it was you didn't build it for the sukkah. You have to make sure that they built it for shade, not for storage, and not for tznius.
Not drying
That was
things.
the thing. It has to be clear that it has a lot of shade, that made it for
Yeah,
shade.
yes.
The purpose was
Yes.
shade. So that's an
But
important point that it's
but it
adding.
seems
And it seems like it's adding that it's bringing that brisa maybe in in connection with the previous Gemara that have talked about the sukkah of the Yitzrim, the potters, that their sukkah needs that even though the sukkah, seemingly he's got a good sukkah there, but it sometimes doesn't work. There's certain qualifications, even though you don't need a sukkah l'shem sukkah. So the question really is, why are both of those Gemaras here and not maybe after the next Mishnah, right? The next Mishnah seemingly would be a good place to put them because they're both talking about cases where you didn't build the sukkah l'shem, l'shem sukkah. So that's an interesting question.
so it's a transition between the long discussion about the round sukkah, all the computations. It's the transition, this one page, to the next Mishnah.
Yeah, in other words, why is this more connected to the round sukkah? Maybe that would be the question. Why would these? What's the connection between these sukkahs and the round sukkah? Well, I mean, I guess there is a connection. Maybe you could say because the round sukkah, we had an opinion earlier of Achirim that said a sukkah that's made like a dovecote is not a kosher sukkah. So based on that view, what was the reason for that? The reason why Achirim said that it was made like a dovecote, it doesn't have corners. And what's wrong with not having corners? So it seemed that it's not a normal type of dwelling.
Correct.
So
That's
we
right.
have so because we have that type of qualification, so it led us into the sukkah of the Yitzrim, which is a dwelling, but it's too much of a dwelling. It's a dwelling all year round. So here you have something that's not a dwelling, it's not kosher. Although Rabbi Yochanan says it is okay if it's big, it's size, Rabbi Yochanan or and he gives his measurement. But he holds a round sukkah is kosher. So maybe that leads us into the potter's sukkah that has its qualifications of having a dwelling, of being too much of a dwelling. And then that leads us into the sukkahs rakbash and ganbach and rakbash, that may be so maybe
there's a flow.
Yeah.
There's a flow. Even we can't study it all together because ironically, before the discussion of the round sukkah that doesn't have corners, we discussed only having corners and whether that worked because we allowed it for Shabbos with the wells.
Right. Interesting. So maybe that's the round sukkah that doesn't have corners, in contrast to the sukkah that only has corners. Very good point. Nice. That's a nice point. That the other sukkah only had corners. So here you have a sukkah without corner. Well, yeah, and then in the Gemara had a sukkah that doesn't have walls, or the wall and the schach is the same, I should say. Okay, very good. So anyway, that's the Mishnah here, and the Gemara that we learned, it talked about what's the pasuk, what's the source that a sukkah needs to be made lishma according to Beis Shammai. What would the source be for Beis Shammai? So initially, the Gemara wanted to say the pasuk of Chag HaSukkos Shivas Yamim LaHashem. Now, when it says Shivas Yamim LaHashem, that's a pasuk in Vayikra. So that pasuk implies that it needs to be for Hashem, or it needs to be for the Chag. In other words, similar to the Chagiga. So basically, the source of Beis Shammai is from Shivas Yamim LaHashem, and you would need to make the sukkah l'shem Hashem. Rashi uses the reason l'Hashem is l'shem mitzvahs hamelach. L'Hashem, l'shem mitzvahs hamelach. So he seems to learn it from LaHashem. And Beis Hillel says you need that pasuk for a different reason, that the wood of the sukkah is prohibited all 7 days of Sukkot. We mentioned that it's a machlokes, really, if that refers only to the schach, or if the walls would also be prohibited to benefit from during the uh, uh, if the walls would be prohibited to benefit from also during the entire Sukkot. Is that also prohibited from this pasuk, or because they're nullified to the schach? But basically, the pasuk says, "Chaga Sukkot Shivas Yamim LaHashem," that all 7 days the sukkah is set aside for Hashem. So the point is that this other view is of the opinion that it's talking about the sukkah has to be for Hashem, and Beis Shammai was holding that the sukkah has to be built for Hashem. So now, does it have to be built for Hashem, or does it have to? Does the wood have to be used for Hashem, and you shouldn't have personal benefit from? And the simple understanding would be the schach, the woods meaning the schach, would be for Hashem, or possibly it includes the walls as well. And again, this would only apply to the during the holiday of Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres. But afterwards, the main thing with the tashmishe mitzvah, this is a tashmish of a mitzvah. The main thing about it would be that you can't do a bizoyon to it and do something that would be disgraceful to it. Similar to what we brought up. I think Ruvain brought it up the other day, that a talus going into the bathroom is more like a disgrace. And that's that, even though according to halacha, maybe you could get away with, especially in today's bathrooms, maybe you could get away with saying that it's not really a bathroom. But nevertheless, it would still be, it's really not appropriate, and it's somewhat disgraceful. So the custom is definitely not to bring a talus even in today's bathrooms. And the same thing applies to a kittel, which is only worn for davening. So they don't bring a kittel when, like for on Yom Kippur, when people wear a kittel, which is only worn for davening. It's also considered you're not allowed to bring it into the bathroom. Why? It's a disgrace. There's no halacha real. It's not that it's a part of a certain halacha, not that it's not allowed to be in the bathroom, but it's more of a bizoyon that we're not supposed to use mitzvah items, something that's set aside for mitzvah, for bizoyon in a disgraceful, in a way of disgrace. So the same thing would apply with the sukkah, that the sukkah shouldn't be, you wouldn't be allowed to throw it out. The schach, you wouldn't throw it out with regular garbage. You put it with maybe the bulk items and things like that. So anyway, so the point is,
seems like the same thing as with the gartel.
The gartel, yeah, it's the same thing, correct. Now the Gemara then says, but there's a problem. Beis Shammai also holds this. Beis Shammai also holds, doesn't he need the pasuk for this? Actually, I skipped one little thing. The Gemara says that there's a similar teaching. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says the same way Shem Shamayim, the same way the heavenly name attaches itself, is connected to the Chagiga offering, so is the heavenly name Shem Shamayim, in other words, Hashem's name, is connected to the Sukkah. And it's because it says Chag HaSukkah is Shivas Yamim LaHashem, Machag LaHashem, Af Sukkah LaHashem. That just like the Chagiga is for Hashem, so also the Sukkah is for Hashem. So you have that second way of understanding it that I sort of mentioned it earlier, that there's a second way of understanding it, that it's based on the word Chag, that Chag is Chag HaSukkah is Shivas Yamim LaHashem, that it's Chag, it's similar to Chag. Chag is Chagiga, the korban Chagiga, it's for Hashem. So also you have to build the Sukkah for Hashem. So that would be the understanding of That would be the understanding of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira's brisa. Now, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, this brisa that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says, the statement, seemingly you could understand it more than one way, because Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, he says, just like the Chag, Korban Chagigas for Hashem, you can't benefit from it. So what he says is the Sukkah also is for Hashem, that you're not allowed to benefit from it. So what that means is that Beis Hillel's view of understanding Chag HaSukkah Shivas Yamim LaHashem, that the Sukkah is for Hashem. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says it's not really because it says the Sukkah is for Hashem, but it's really because that it's really because it says Chag, and the word Chagiga means that you would have to consider it prohibited in benefit, just like a Chagiga. So in other words, there are two ways of understanding Beis Hillel's law based on the pasuk, that it's either because it says the Sukkah is for Hashem, or it's because the Sukkah is like the Chagiga. That's seemingly what the Gemara, that's what the Gemara is basically saying, that the brisa fits with this with Rav Sheshes, or it's similar to Rav Sheshes. So at least the law is the same. He learns that a little differently, but it's the same law. The point is that it's prohibited to benefit from this sukkah all the days of sukkahs. The Gemara says, "Beis Shammai nami mi boy leilach." The Gemara says, "But so Beis Shammai also seems to also hold that you're not allowed to benefit from the walls of the sukkah." The Gemara says, "Yeah, einachanami." The Gemara answers, "So what's the reason of Beis Shammai?" It says, "No, it's a different pasuk, very similar, but it's a different pasuk. It's a pasuk in Dvarim. In the pasuk in Dvarim says, Chag HaSukkos tasil chashivas yamim, that the sukkah has to be made l'shem chag. You have to have in mind Chag HaSukkos tasil chashivas yamim, that it's l'shem chag, and you have to do it for the holiday, for the mitzvah. Beis Hillel says that teaches you that Chag HaSukkos tasil chashivas yamim, that it has to be, that it's that not that it has to be, that you're allowed to make a sukkah on Chol HaMoed, even if you didn't make it in the beginning, even though it's not for 7 days, it's kosher. And how does Beis Hillel have this? How does he understand it? So he translates the pasuk that Ta'aseh sukkos b'chag. You could make sukkahs on the holiday. So the previous opinion, Beis Shammai held that you're learning the pasuk that it says Chag HaSukkos Ta'aseh, and we're translating it Sukkos Ta'aseh Lichag. You should make sukkahs for the holiday, having in mind the holiday. Beis Hillel is learning that it's Chag HaSukkos Ta'aseh means on the Chag you could make sukkahs. That Ta'aseh sukkahs b'Chag, you can make sukkahs on the Chag, and therefore Beis Hillel, interesting. They both like switch around the words of the pasuk slightly differently, but basically they're coming up with their view based on the same 3 words. And Beis Shammai, the Gemara says, holds that you are allowed, you're not allowed to make a sukkah on Chol HaMoed. It has to be a sukkah for 7 days, and therefore, if you built a sukkah on Chol HaMoed, it would be a problem. the Gemara continues and talks about the law of Lishma. So we're going to start here where it is in the middle of the page where it says, Ubeis Hill, well, towards the end, I should say, maybe about 12 lines up, 10 lines up from the bottom of the page. Ubeis Hillel les Lahud Rav Yehuda Marav. Does Beis Hillel. So we're on 9a, about 10 lines up from the bottom of the page. If you have an art scroll, we are on 9a, 9a2. Okay, 9a2. The second paragraph. Basically, the Gemara wants to know, doesn't all mitzvahs need to be made for the sake of the mitzvah? Don't you need to have in mind the mitzvah? And if the Gemara brings from Sukkah, the Tzitzis, Beis Hillel les Luhud Rav Yehuda Marav, does Beis Hillel not hold of Rav Yehuda Marav that the Tzitzis need to be made l'shma? Dam Rav Yehuda Marav. You just said in the name of Rav. Also, mina koitzin. If you made the tzitzis from koitzin, this is a little complicated. Exactly what this means. All these cases, there's different discussion. There's discussion in the commentaries exactly what these mean. Rashi says the koitzin are somehow at the end. What happened is sometimes the string would somehow rip, and you would tie it back together and continue like weaving, and so it would stick out like a thorn. The knot would stick out. So you tie it back. You're in the middle of weaving. So that piece of the garment, you might say, oh, let me use that as a tzitzis because I made a knot. I actually made 5 knots or something. That's my tzitzis, right? You made some knots to it. Maybe you could call that tzitzis. The Rabbi Yehuda Marav says no. The tzitzis have to be made l'shma. You made koitzin. You made this thorn, which basically it means it's a thorn like, it looks like a thorn. It's attaching a string that tore from your garment, and you attach it afterwards so you can continue weaving. And ultimately, in the end, it sticks out. So you say, oh, let me consider that my tzitzis. No, that's not going to work. And then it says, what about umin animin? You made the sukkah from some type of like the hem of the garment. It has some string sticking out. So you want to use that as your tzitzis. Somehow it's hanging, so some leftover some string that's that you're going to at the edge of the garment that's there after you finished sewing. And the same, and similarly, minhag rodin, and that's at the end, the edge of the beged after you wove it. So you have this minhag rodin, something similar to these other cases. That basically it wasn't made for the mitzvah of sukkah of tzitzis. It was made, part of your weaving or part of your sewing, and you tied it there. So the thing is, psula, these are all puzzle, and they're not eligible to be considered tzitzis. Minasisin, if you made it from this long string that's rolled up into a ball. So in this case, you wove it it was spun not for the sake of the mitzvah, but you're actually gonna tie it for the mitzvah of tzitzis. So minasisin, that would be kshera, that would be kosher because you're tying it for the mitzvah of tzitzis. And the fact that it wasn't spun for the mitzvah of tzitzis, that's not a problem. Making the tzitzis is only connected to tying the tzitzis, not to spinning the yarn. So therefore, the difference between these 4 cases, 3 cases are puzzle and 1 case is kosher. The case that's kosher is a case where it was maybe spun not for the mitzvah of tzitzis. In other words, it wasn't spun for the mitzvah of tzitzis, but it was put on for the mitzvah of tzitzis, and that will make it considered a kosher kosher tzitzis, because you made it for the mitzvah. It doesn't have to be spun for the mitzvah. Now, this was Rabbi Yehuda talking in the name of Rav. Why? Because Rabbi Yehuda studied under Rav. But then after Rav passed away, Rabbi Yehuda went to learn by Shmuel. When he went to learn by Shmuel, he used to tell Shmuel all the different things that he heard by Rav. And Shmuel used to sometimes say, "Oh, I don't hold that way," that. So Ki Amrisa Kamei de Shmuel. So Rav Yehuda continues and says, I said this, what I heard from Rav, I said it in front of Shmuel, because I went to learn by Shmuel afterwards, after Rav passed away. And he said it to Shmuel. Amar li, Shmuel said to me, Af min asisa nami psula, even from the season which was made, that you made the tzitzis for the mitzvah of tzitzis, but it wasn't spun properly. It wasn't spun for the mitzvah of tzitzis. So also from season is psula. Also this ball of yarn or string is going to be puzzle. The be'inan teviyah lishma, because Shmuel says you needs to be spun for the mitzvah of tzitzis. And so what we see is that mitzvahs have to be done lishma. You need to do mitzvahs for the purpose of lishma, of doing it for the mitzvah of tzitzis. And the question on our Gemara is Hachanami. The Gemara says here also niboy sukkah suya lishma. We should need a sukkah that it should be built. It should be made for the purpose of the mitzvah of tzitzis of sukkah, just like the mitzvah of tzitzis, that you need to make the tzitzis lishma. And according to Shmuel, you also need to even spin it lishma. And the Gemara says that no, there's a difference. The Gemara says there's a difference. And what is the difference? Shani Hasam, the Amar Kra, Gedilim Tasalach, Lach L'Shem Chayfcha. That here is different, that it says in the Pasuk, about tzitzis, and it says Gedilim, you should make these tzitzis on the 4 corners of your garment. It says Gedilim Tasa Lach. Lach for you. What does it mean for you? So it means for your obligation. Gedilim Tasa Lach. And I could just say Gedilim Tasa. Why does it say Lach? Means for your obligation, to fulfill your obligation of tzitzis. And so we see that there's a special pasuk that teaches you have to make tzitzis lishma for the purpose of the mitzvah of tzitzis. You need to make tzitzis for that purpose. Here also here also you need to make the sukkah. You should make the sukkah lecha tasa lecha. The Gemara says here also, maybe the Gemara asks. The Gemara is asking questions. It says, Hachanami, here also it says you should make sukkahs for you, means for your obligation, for the mitzvah. So maybe the sukkah has to be made for the mitzvah. So the Gemara answers, yeah, but that pasuk is really needed for another purpose. That is, in order to tell you have to make it from yours, that you can't have a stolen sukkah, which is really the topic of a Gemara later. It's really, this is not the location of this discussion, but it talks about having a sukkah that's puzzle, that's invalid because it's stolen, and it has to really be yours, not a stolen one. And so because we learn a special law regarding the sukkah that it can't be stolen, So therefore, you need that pasuk, and it doesn't teach you that it has to be lishma. The Gemara says that hasam nami mi boy le lebutik zul. What about tzitzis? Tzitzis you're allowed to steal. What about tzitzis? If you stole tzitzis, is that going to be a kosher tzitzis? Tzitzis you're also not allowed to steal. So you need the pasuk for tzitzis as well. That it should be that you can't use stolen tzitzis. The Gemara answers hasam ksiv karachrina. There's another pasuk that it says v'asu lahem mishalahem. Over there it says another pasuk by tzitzis that you need to have yours and can't be stolen. It has to be from yours. So therefore, we don't need the pasuk that we brought earlier to teach you that stolen is not acceptable, is invalid. So instead, we have that pasuk. We can use that pasuk before for the pasuk. I'm sorry, the pasuk by tzitzis, right? We learned that it has to be made lishma, and the other there's another pasuk that says it can't be stolen. However, by sukkah, according to Beis Hillel, you only have one pasuk that possibly you could have used for. It has to be lishma, but we use it instead for that it can't be stolen. Now, Tosfos over here asks a very powerful question. He says, you can't have a stolen sukkah. He says, we know you can't have a stolen sukkah. It's called a mitzvah b'avera. Mitzvah that's a mitzvah that's b'avera, that it's a mitzvah that is done through an avera. So how could you even think that you could use a sukkah for how could you even think that you could use a sukkah that's stolen? It's a mitzvah b'avera. It's a mitzvah that's done through an avera. So how could you even think of such a thing? So the simple answer that Tosfos gives is mitzvah b'avera is not the oraisa, it's only drabbanan, it's only rabbinic law. That you can't do a mitzvah that's done through an avera. That would be rabbinically, it would invalidate it. But biblically, it would be kosher. So here, by sukkah, we have a special law that tells you that even biblically, it's invalid if it's stolen. The sukkah, so to speak, has to be yours, or at least it can't be stolen. And that's learned from this pasuk of Chag HaSukkos Tas Elocha.